Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Donald Trump in the Oval Office talking about the trade agreement with the UK. It is a framework, and I guess more negotiations over the coming weeks to get an agreement, but wide-ranging discussion there on global trade, particularly with the United Kingdom. Enda Curran joins us. He's a global economy reporter for Bloomberg News. He's based down in Washington, D.C. Hey, Enda, you listen to the president here. It looks like there is a framework for an agreement between the United States and the UK. Put this into context. What did you take away?
Well, there are certainly some micro details in it. I mean, for example, on the US side, tariffs on steel from the UK going to zero. You have engines and plane parts from Boeing also coming in tariff-free. That's on one side. That's clearly a potential boost for those businesses on that side. And then on the UK side, Britain is committed to buying $10 billion worth of Boeing planes. And there's going to be a quota for allowing US beef, 13,000 metric tons of US beef into the UK. Now, there's a wrinkle on that one in terms of food standards is not going to change. So that's probably worth keeping an eye on. So, there's clearly some wins there for steel and for car autos on the UK side, wins for maybe farmers and a lift for Boeing on this side, on the US side. But, writ large, it's a long way from a true in-depth trade agreement. There is no change to the 10% minimum baseline tariff that will go on UK goods coming to the US. And that's noteworthy because if the US isn't willing to drop that for both an economic and a security ally like the UK, then you question whether that would change for anybody. So it's interesting that they got it done. Parts of it significant for the industries involved, but it's not as sweeping perhaps as some of the headlines might suggest.
Talk to us about the ag part. So the ethanol, the corn, that part of it. The headline number sounds really good, and trade wars hurt farmers. We saw that in the first administration for President Trump. What do you think the takeaway from that will be?
Well, we heard the Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rowlands, hailing it as a big deal for US farmers in particular. And they were touting, for example, and the UK Ambassador Mandelson made the same point, they were touting this agreement on beef going in tariff-free quota of 13,000 metric tons. Now, that will be interesting. That does open up potentially new market access for US farmers, no question. But within that, though, as I mentioned earlier, the food standard part of it isn't changing. So we'll have to see how that impacts in practice, in terms of how those imports or exports do work out to the UK in terms of what's allowed in and what the demand is. But, on paper, it's a concession on the UK side for US farmers.
Enda, thank you so much for your reporting there. Enda Curran, global economy reporter for Bloomberg News. He's based down there in Washington, D.C. Let's go across to London right now, get that point of view. Joe Mays joins us here. He covers the economy, the UK economy. He's based in our London studios over there. Hey, Joe, you listened to the president speak and the prime minister via phone. What's the takeaway over there in London, do you think?
Well, the UK government is trying to sell this as a major political win for them. They are saying that particularly the reduction in tariffs on cars under that 100,000 quota down to 10%, they say that's a big win. And also steel tariffs going from 25% to zero, and the same for aluminium, is also a good news story for steelmakers in the UK. But nevertheless, there is criticism of this deal already from opposition parties, pointing out that the UK is still in a worse position than before Donald Trump became president, still with that 10% tariff on goods, still indeed having that 10% tariff on cars, even under a quota. So yeah, it's a limited victory, I think, seen in the UK, but one that's nevertheless welcome.
How does Prime Minister Keir Starmer sell this to, say, Europe? Like, hey, I did this deal, but you should also do a deal with me, and this is why, when there's going to be some tension there between, say, the US and the EU?
Yeah, I think the UK has been quite careful with this agreement with the US not to commit to anything that would materially obstruct them from doing closer deals economically with the EU. So, for example, on food standards, yes, we do have provision in this agreement for more beef imports into the UK from the US, but the UK has said they are maintaining very strict standards on food, for example, which are a key red line for the European Union. So I think that what's happened here is the UK is still trying to walk this tightrope of economic ties between the US and EU, and has managed to broadly maintain that here, but it has meant that the scope of ambition for this US deal has had to be limited.
All right, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting a couple minutes of your time. Joe Mayes, he covers the UK economy for Bloomberg News. He's based in our Queen Victoria Street station over there.
This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.